Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Cars, etc, a show about cars and a whole lot of other stuff as well. Brought to us as always by altcointrader.co.za. Go on there, register for free and get into the world of cryptocurrencies. So you get these five brothers and they decide, you know what, let's start an automobile company. And they're Italian. What could go wrong? We're talking about the fabulous Trident Maserati. And joining me today is the wonderful Dr Lilliana Lulli, who used to be an ambassador for Maserati South Africa. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Where did your love for Maserati start?
Two very clear origins. So the first is growing up an only child in a household where my dad was an absolute Formula One and automotive fanatic, meant that once a month we'd go into Joburg town, very near the Carlton Centre, and we'd collect a stack of imported Italian automotive magazines, or specifically F1 Autosprint. But lots of other car magazines, and I'd always flip through them with Dad. And the one thing that always struck me was these crazy exotic names of the Maserati models. And I remember asking him the one day, you know, who makes these names? Who creates these names? And he said, well, they're not really made up names. They're, you know, the names of winds that sweep through the continents. They're these great gale force winds. And as a kid, I thought that was just mind-blowing. It created this air of mystery around Maserati and a real connection to the elements, and that really resonated with me. And then the second reason, and possibly the most important for me, is the first female Formula One driver drove a Maserati. So that was really where my sort of the two biggest influences came from.
Amazing. That's quite a story. Now Maserati, I mean, I love the name. I mean, just the name Maserati, the Trident is very, very special. But not dissimilar to other manufacturers like Lamborghini, like Jaguar, and you can go through a whole host as well, has had a very checkered career. Five Italian brothers trying to organize things. We know it's going to be quite complicated. Why do these manufacturers go through these very difficult sort of adolescent stages?
I think it has a lot to do with the era in which they were created. So with Jaguar, with Maserati, they were companies created very much around World War I and the economic depressions of the 1920s. And that's a very difficult and volatile time to try and start a company. I think they were forced to create, innovate, compete at an intensity that's very difficult to sustain in conditions when the world is in turmoil, both financially and interpersonally. And in the case of Lamborghini and Ferrari, they were more around World War II, which produced even harsher world conditions. And I think it's very volatile. I don't think it's very easy to keep something going and make it successful, especially something as trivial as racing driving when we're dealing with World War IIs and economic depressions. That's hard. That's very difficult.
It's so bizarre you say that, and I won't say we're on a brink of another world war, but I mean we are all of a sudden in this bizarre time of COVID that we're still all dealing with, and now we have this aggression that is happening between Ukraine and Russia, and nobody knows the future. It's quite bizarre where we're living in. Maserati, as you mentioned, I mean, steeped in motor history, which has just been remarkable for them. And one of my favorite ever cars that were ever made was the Maserati 250F. Mr. Rupert's got one at
Franschhoek Motor Museum.
At Franschhoek Motor Museum, and I actually saw it going around the track at Kyalami a couple of years ago.
Oh, wow.
It is just a magnificent motor vehicle. Fangio, you know, everyone remembers Fangio for his world titles, but I think most people embrace him. As much as Mercedes, he had a good connection with him. there's something very special about the Maserati 250F.
Yeah, well, not only by Fangio, it was raced by Sir Sterling Moss,
Yeah.
Mike Hawthorne, and of course the first female Formula One driver, Maria Teresa De Filippis. She preferred it over a Ferrari. She was offered a drive at Ferrari, but preferred to drive the Maserati 250F, saying that it was much more balanced. It was one of the most incredible racing cars of the period, and a lot of people tried to get their hands on them, but not many were made.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, are there any available? You know, we know that Johan Rupert's got one. There are one or two. Do they ever come up on the market?
They're very rare. So the history books will tell you that 34 chassis numbers were made. In the 1980s, Motorsport magazine tried to create a comprehensive list of what was in existence, but it proved very difficult because lots of people have tried to do legal and illegal things with this particular car. 23 models have been verified as being original. However, not all of them are the same, the car. Some of them were built on a pre-existing chassis, and they were less competitive, obviously because the likes of Fangio and Sir Sterling Moss wanted superior racing cars. So they kind of got first pick, and then everyone else kind of got, I won't say inferior versions, they were called piccolos, which are little in Italian.
So they weren't quite the same. But I mean, just an astonishing car, the Maserati 250F. Lilliana, let's talk a little bit about the road cars, 1950s, the 3500 GT. I've seen a few here in South Africa. It is just gorgeous car, and it all of a sudden, you know, it sort of made Maserati very desirable in the sense of as a Grand Tourer kind of car.
Yeah, it was their first road production car, so outside of racing. They created it to really keep the company going. Not many were made. There was only 2,200 of them made.
Wow.
So very rare. I know of 3 in South Africa, but there could be as many as 5 or 6.
Okay.
But personally, I've seen 3.
And they just, they're just something beautiful to look at. And also, I mean, you know, as you say, they're 3 or maybe even 5 or 6. There are a few around the world. Are they in demand? I mean, if they come up, do people pay really big prices for these cars?
Yeah, I'm actually following an auction online at the moment that's taking place in Belgium, and the prices are ranging anywhere from £145,000 up to £600,000. For the Vignale versions, the coach builder Vignale, those ones seem to be a little bit more valuable, and they also seem to be the ones that are the cabrio versions. So very rare. It's kind of what put Maserati on the map as a road car production house. If you can find one, shoo, good luck.
Good luck. And at £600,000, which is about 12 million rand, yeah, go for it. There we go, pocket change. Now, you spoke about the wins. After 3500 GT, all of a sudden Maserati went and made a car called a Mistral, which was completely different kind of design to what the 3500 GT was. And I mean, I remember looking at it going, but it's so completely different. Was it a success? Was it, I mean, you know, did people sit there and go, wow, a different era?
Yeah, so mid-1960s, so I think the whole world was moving into this more free-spirited revolution. The design was considered very innovative because it got rid of the need for the front grille because of the way that the front air intake was designed.
Okay.
And it was also the first car to feature a tailgate because it's very high-pitched tail. So it was quite a revolutionary vehicle in terms of aerodynamics and design, but beautiful to look at, but worlds apart from the first production road car.
And I mean, this is when all of a sudden it gets quite confusing with Maserati because, you know, they were still, the brothers were sort of part of it, I think, you know, or Fisi name that was involved, and then all of a sudden Citroen came in. And the one thing about Citroën in the world of motoring, when it comes to innovation and design, they are one of the greatest that have ever done. And it wasn't the best marriage between the two, but it did produce some very fascinating collaborations.
The SM, the Indy, the Borra,
yes,
the Marak, the comes in, and then the oil crisis of 1973 hit. So it was quite a short relationship. I think it was a relationship out of necessity to keep the brand
yes.
going. But it certainly took a very interesting turn in design. Yeah.
But I mean, okay, so the SM, which was a Citroën with a Maserati engine, which is just beautiful. I mean, it's just so bizarre. It's wonderful. But for example, Borra, beautiful, beautiful car. Did it have the kind of reliability? And I mean, is Borra today, if somebody goes out and looks for a Borra, I remember Top Gear doing a show, and one of theirs was getting cheap Italian cars, you know, under a certain price. And one of them got a Maserati Borra. And I mean, they picked it up for nothing, and the car was just full of these weird idiosyncrasies and problems.
Niggles.
With it. Yeah, horrible niggles, as opposed to nice niggles.
Yeah, it was a very limited run. There was two versions of the Borra. They had a 4.7 and a 4.9, 314 of the former and 250 of the latter were produced. But this is, in terms of aesthetics, this is where it starts getting really exciting, because this is where the angular lines, the aerodynamics start playing a role, and this is where Giugiaro got involved in terms of the styling. So aesthetically, quite an exciting era, but Italian cars are full of niggles anyway. You know, they're like the people that make them. But it was quite impressive. I mean, it was a V8 with top speeds of around 280 k's an hour, so no slouch, no snail. But yeah, very temperamental. And remember, it was very near the oil crisis as well. So yes, things started to sort of be starting to downscale. Build quality did suffer a little bit.
Yeah, and then of course Merak comes in, that came through as well. Beautiful looking cars, not fantastically reliable in terms of reliability. But it comes to the age-old question when you're buying a classic car. And you can find Meraks and Borras and Kamzins internationally. There are not many here in South Africa, if any, of those kind of models. But you can find them at a relatively bargain kind of price. But it's going to take a bit to get them up and running.
Yeah, the Merak's currently selling anywhere, well, around the $100,000 mark. So for a South African to purchase it, that's quite costly. If you're going to start sourcing original parts, which ideally you should do with a period car,
of course,
you're going to be paying in dollars, pounds, or euros. So there's that to consider. But any old vintage car with niggles, you know, you're constantly going to be fidgeting or niggling with something. I mean, mine is sitting right next to us at the moment in 1,000 different pieces. And I can tell you it has not been an easy journey to restore a vintage classic car.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very
costly. As you say, especially if you're trying to get original parts, sometimes you sit there and say, well, the cost of actually restoring this, I will never ever get my money back, but you will have something that is very, very precious.
Absolutely.
So it's that sort of trade-off. I mean, if you're doing it to restore to sell, you got to work out your numbers a little bit differently. Are there? I mean, I don't know of any Meraks or Kamzins or Borras in South Africa.
I have seen a Kamzin here.
Okay.
It was in fact in the Maserati showroom in Bryanston.
Okay.
Taped off with a beautiful, red rope stanchions. I have seen it I don't know if it was maybe brought in on a carne
Okay.
just to display in the dealership at the time, but I've definitely seen one in South African soil.
Okay. I mean, listen, they are readily available all over the internet, and I mean, yes, you can bring them in if they're right-hand drive into South Africa, or those who are purchasing them internationally. But as you said, there's quite a caveat in the sense of the cost associated with getting it back into its original spec can be sometimes cost prohibitive. In the 80s, one of my favorite cars was the Maserati Biturbo. And there were lots of them. Here, specifically in South Africa as well. I mean, I would go around and you'd see this plush leather interior and where the gear knob was, all this beautiful leather. And there's something very special also about Maserati is the clock.
Yes.
Just, it's just the Trident and the dials, it looks magnificent. Biturbo, everyone you talk to nowadays, Maserati Biturbo, worst car they ever made, what a load of nonsense. And I think that's very, very unfair. I think it was a brilliant, brilliant car. Why has it got such a bad rap?
I think, again, you have to consider the time period in which it was made. The 1973 oil crisis had just hit. The company was forced to start downscaling things and becoming much more aware of economics. Mm-hmm. And again, I think the build quality did suffer a little bit. Beautiful to look at. I would definitely love to have one in my garage. Definitely one of my dream cars. But yes, a little unreliable. But I don't think that it really deserves such a bad reputation. Yeah. Unreliable, yes, but not a 10 out of 10 unreliable. Maybe about a 2 or 3.
Well, that's the thing. And also, when you're buying supercars, sports cars, they also need to be driven.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you sit there and leave it in the garage for 3 or 4 months and all of a sudden it's not going the same you go, hold on a second, who's to blame here?
Yes, they absolutely need to be exercised. You need to keep the oils running, you need to keep the fluids running. You obviously need to do your regular maintenance. I think a lot of people buy vintage cars and they kind of stick it in their garage and it's something beautiful to look at and it's a gem and it's a jewel and they're maybe too scared to drive it, but those cars were made to be driven.
Of course.
And when you do drive it, you need to manhandle that thing. I mean, it's not an easy thing to drive. So you need to keep all those parts moving. You need to keep it a well-oiled machine, so to speak.
I agree. You see, so all those people who've got these fancy cars in your garages that are just sitting there, why don't you just go and buy the model cars and let people like myself go out and drive them?
I'll drive it for you.
There we go. We'll do it together. Has the Maserati brand been affected by its change of ownership so many times? It's a lot more stable now than it was, but has the brand been affected?
I don't think in terms of it changing hands so often. I think when it's gone through periods of stasis in design, like recently, before things like the Ghibli and the Levante were introduced, we had this kind of real period of stagnation.
Yes.
And it just kind of sat, and models that were on offer were the ones that were on offer, and they weren't really new, innovative, exciting things to look at coming out. I think that maybe affected their reputation a little, but the fact that it's been standing for over 100 years is testament to what an incredible mark or brand it truly is, and I think that's really what's pulled it through. And I hope that we're in a resurgence phase now with the MC20. I hope that this means we're getting back on the map.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk about those because, once Fiat, I mean, for the last 20, 30 odd years, Fiat, Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, all branded together. Fiat took it over, then matched it with Ferrari for a bit, then took it away, then matched it with Alfa Romeo, and now trying to sit there and, I think, establish each of the brands on their own, which is fantastic for each of them. And sort of the first car that they brought out, you know, under the Fiat ownership or whatever, is just a car that I love. The 3200 GT with those lights at the back.
Classic boomerang lights.
There we go. And the next generation had to change the lights for the Americans because they couldn't understand how they worked. But that was an astonishing car, and quite a lot of them sold here in South Africa.
Yes, we're very fortunate to have one in the garage.
Beautiful. Must take me for a drive.
I will do.
Yeah. What is so special about that car? And I mean, it is, you know, the people, I know people who sit there and say, please, can you try and find me a 3200 GT, but specifically the one with the boomerang light.
Yes. So as you said, they were changed. The 3200 evolved into the 4200. Both of them were built in the era where Ferrari was running Maserati. Mm-hmm. Those particular engines were based on the 430, the Ferrari 430 model. But what's very exciting about those is they created a Maserati Trofeo championship, which was an intercontinental championship involving one marque, Maserati, but it was hugely successful. And I think that created a lot of excitement and hype around that car, but also this departure from previous designs to something that was becoming much more modern, obviously, more rounded, more closely resembling those supercars that were on the road at the time.
Okay.
And just fantastic to look at,
Beautiful.
Really.
Same as the Gran Sport.
Yes.
Yes, you know, the Gran Sport Coupe. And I think what was so important in that era, or the beginning of that era, the Fiat and Ferrari era, was going back to its roots, and its roots was racing. And now we know that they're going into Formula E, which will be interesting to follow in the future. Those two cars were very, very special. Also very sought after, the Gran Sport Coupe, Trofeo series. Are there quite a few of them around in South Africa, do you know?
I don't know numbers exactly, but if you happen to go past a Maserati club run on some Sundays, certain Sundays, particularly at breakfast time, you will see quite a few of them in tow.
It's quite amazing. Quite amazing. Are they also sought after? I mean, do they swap hands, or, I mean, you know, if you want a Grand Sport or whatever, are they relatively easy to find?
They're quite easy to find, but people are very reluctant to get rid of them.
Okay, yeah.
Once you've got them, you kind of hold on to them, particularly the limited edition ones with the carbon fiber tub seats. There's the very same ones which are in the Ferrari Enzo, and they're obviously limited editions, so people tend to really hold on to those guys, but they are driven. Which
is great. Okay, that's great. You mentioned the word Enzo. Maserati made, I think, one of the most spectacular and brutal track cars ever, called the MC12. Very few of them are left in the world. And it's astonishing. I mean, the prices that people are prepared to pay for this car is remarkable. But, I mean, the Enzo is magnificent, but the MC12 is something quite special.
So this is where I start getting extremely excited and start fangirling. There's only 50. Well, only 50 were produced.
Yes.
So extremely rare. I have been so fortunate to have seen and touched and fiddled around in two of them.
Oh, wow.
One at Pebble Beach in California and one at Goodwood, obviously in England. And I've had the privilege of chatting many times to Andrea Bertolini, who's the racing driver who's very intimately connected with that machine. And he describes it, and this always gives me goosebumps. In fact, I've got them now. He always describes it as brute force wrapped in elegance.
Oh, stunning.
And I just think that's so apt.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, V12, top speed of 330 kilometers an hour.
It's just magnificent.
It looks fast while it's standing still. The various different liveries that you've seen. It's just
I'm also, I'm in awe of that car.
Yeah,
It is,
total fangirl moment.
yeah, it's one of those where, you know what, if I was a little bit younger, I'd have a post on my wall.
Well,
I definitely would.
I'm a little bit older and I still have a poster on my wall.
It's amazing. Now, and it's amazing you brought it up a little bit earlier. MC12 and then Maserati came out, and we had the Gran Turismo that came out. And I agree with you. It's a beautiful car, magnificent car. Gran Turismo Sport, the Stradale version of it. Brilliant, brilliant cars. But it's been around for 12 years now. And every other year, there were just slight outside aesthetic modifications. There was nothing inside that was improved, no engine performance improvements besides the second run. Why was there such a stagnant period?
I think that stasis is really where Maserati was starting to hit turbulent times financially. I think that swapping of hands that we spoke about
But
earlier.
this was all under the Fiat ownership. I mean, it just seems as though the bosses between Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, Fiat or whatever didn't really know what to do with the brand.
Yeah, I think they really badly wanted to keep the heritage and the prestige of the mark going, but nobody was really dedicating time to the design process. So yes, those very minor aesthetic changes were happening, but luckily we're out of that now, and we're, like I said, hopefully back on the map with the MC20. It's a hugely exciting vehicle.
Yeah, magnificent, magnificent car. Let's talk about it. It's a V6, twin turbo. I think it's coming out in the next couple of months in Europe, and we most probably get our first ones here in South Africa in maybe later this year or the beginning of next year. But this now, I mean, this is a supercar. You know, this is not just your run-of-the-mill Maserati.
Absolutely, and it's street legal, so there's going to be lots of opportunity there. They also designed it with an electric version in mind.
Yes.
So that's foresight. I'm quite excited to see in the direction in which we're headed. As we said, we signed up for Formula E now for the 2024 season. So hopefully this is us. When I say us, I mean Maserati, because I consider them part of my family. Hopefully this means we start moving back into competitive racing.
Yes.
And I think that this particular model is the thing that's going to kind of propel that. Well, I hope so, at least.
Yeah, very much so. Very, very exciting car. But they also got some exciting vehicles out on the road as well. Some, I think, a little bit conservative in terms of the Ghibli. Quattroporte, I think, is a wonderful car, but it can't compete against BMW 7 Series and Mercedes, so it's a different kind of vehicle. But the one thing that's really grown, and that was Maserati going into the SUV market, the Levante. It sort of started off slowly, but it's gained this incredible traction over the last couple of years. A magnificent SUV, and I mean, people who sit there and look at Porsche Cayennes, etc. I mean, if you haven't seen or sat or driven a Levante, you're missing out.
Absolutely. I think the marketing campaign was very clever. They called it the Maserati of SUVs, and that kind of just sets you off on the right tone.
Yeah.
But I have driven both the normal standard stock version and the Trofeo version. No slouch on the road.
They're quick.
Absolute comfort. The ride is, seamless. Gear changes are seamless. It's really a performance vehicle.
Yes.
It's not your traditional SUV.
Yeah. No, listen, it's a big car, but
Yeah.
now they're talking about bringing in a slightly smaller version of that called the Grecale.
Yes.
5-door. Yeah, which I think is also going to be something. And it seems very much that worldwide, that SUV market is just growing and growing and growing.
Yes, it is. Especially in South Africa, they're hugely popular, and I think it's a security concern mainly. Lots of people are moving towards SUVs because they're perceived to be safer than small racing sports cars. Personally, I want to see us move less SUV, more MC12 racing car.
I'm with you on that as well. I'm with you on that as well. You've brought it up a few times, Lilliana, the Maserati, hopefully you're going in the right direction. Are they going in the right direction?
I think so. I think we're out of this period of static design. I think that we're really heading into performance now. Aesthetics are changing very drastically. I think for Maseratis on the up and up, and hopefully we're back to the good old days in the present day and going forward.
Fantastic. There we go. Listen, thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
Wonderful to see you. That is Maserati. Of course, we'll have all of the information in links below. You can go and check it out as well. That's another edition of Cars, etc., brought to you by altcointrader.co.za. Go there, register for free, and start your cryptocurrency world, something like that. Until the next time, take care. Ciao, ciao.
Ferris Cars is a Ferrari specialist dealership in Sandton, Johannesburg. Since 2010, Ferris Cars has dealt in all things related to Maranello's finest, from classics to the contemporary. Sales, service, advice and exclusive events, Ferris either has it or has access to it. And of course, in partnership with Altcoin Trader, Ferris Cars accepts cryptocurrency and can even help you buy your dream car from any other dealership in crypto. Check out their website at ferriscars.com or follow them on all popular social media platforms.